Just take a look. All right, so everybody knows the Wayback Machine, right? You can go way back, check old sites, check it out. I actually went to the Wayback Machine. I was going to try to pull up some of Google Apps for Education's web pages, but they didn't really cache them very well, so I wasn't able to pull them. But way back, like in 2008, it was pretty interesting. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time to this best practice technical deployment slide 1.0, because I did make 2.0 at some point, and we're going to take a look at this together. All right. So at that time, I was working for Northwest AEA. Punk kid working out of an office shared with Jeff. Was dead set against, we'll see if the internet will work, dead set against Google Apps. I was very much a Microsoft fanboy at that point. And, come on, huh? While that loads. There we go. Converted, we went to a training in Ames, basically converted just because of the fact that even at that point I recognized the chance for collaboration. I didn't necessarily understand how that worked and how that looked in a school, but I knew as a student, I wasn't a student that much further back. I understood that, yeah, collaboration definitely has its place. We needed to look at something different. Even at AEA, as we're out there trying to recommend things to our school districts, we need to understand it better. So Jeff and I both decided, yeah, let's go ahead and do this. So ended up doing it, created this slideshow, and the fun part about this planning part, this is going to be the really fun part, if it'll load. We started talking about username conventions back then, and domain names. So we talked about which primary domain name would we use. Will students use a separate domain name? Will we combine students and staff into a single apps dashboard? All these good things that we used to talk about back in 2008 to 2010. Because back then, Google didn't give us any control mechanisms, really, to be able to lock down by organizational unit. Okay, so back then it was kind of like a set it all for everybody. So we really wanted our staff and our students to have a different experience. In order to do that, we had to make these decisions. Well, now we look back in the primary domain name. Now, most of you might not realize this, but you can go and change your primary domain name in 15 minutes now with very little effect to your domain. Okay, so whether that's through a free tool called Google Apps Manager, it's a command line tool, or they've actually built that functionality now into the dashboard in the GUI. So you literally can go into your Google Apps admin console where you register new domains, add your brand new rebranded domain as an alias, promote it as the primary, and not only does it rename all of your users, it automatically assigns the alias of the old one for you. So if you're using email, it doesn't change anything for you other than your brand new primary domain. So thank you, Google, for finally doing that. When I was at Amplified IT, I saw some of the bills that we charged customers to migrate domains from one domain name to another, and it was insane. It wasn't because we were just trying to make money, it was because we had to go and pay a data migration company to move all of your stuff over, right? It was a huge pain. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Students using a separate domain, does anybody still do that? Like a separate domain name for kids? Everybody's unified now. We kind of went back and looked at that and decided, why are we separating out our image, right? We want to brand our school district. So for branding our school district, why do we want to separate that out? Not only that, but we're going to get into username convention in a second, but that just makes that even longer, right? If you start doing like a student dot your domain or something like that. The only case I could see doing a separate one would be if you're like maybe shorter than your normal one for kids. All right. All right. This one cracks me up. So when I go and I look at this slide, man, this makes me laugh. So last week, a little story, I went into our elementary school. It's a pre-K through first grade building. And right now we're using a program called Lexia. It's for reading, so it helps them do a little better job of reading. And they're wanting to use that on our Chromebooks. So I got them some N22 or Lenovo N22 touch devices for that building. And this is my bad. So previously we used to allow them to go in and sign in using like a classroom sign in. So the teacher would sign in like a K at, right, or a first at, and they'd sign that whole class in. But what we did is we switched this year to use Clever. And Clever is an app that I'll talk about some in the session tomorrow, but I'll also tell you, it's a free company. It's a company that's a free product that ties into like your student information system. So they give you a certain set of rights for using Infinite Campus. So you set it up, and it pulls data nightly from your student information system into Clever. Anybody else using this in here? So there's a few. It's fantastic. It's unbelievable that it's free. So what it does, it pulls basically your information into another database that's web-based. So it's got a secure connection. It's pulling that information nightly, and then it'll sync that information to any, well, not any, but there's a whole bunch of educational applications that it'll sync that information to. So teacher accounts, student accounts, classroom information, building administrators, things like that. So what we did is we switched to that to help kind of make that single sign-on experience a little easier for our kids to sign into all these different things we require them to. Things like Macavia, things like Lexia, things like Greenbox, things like Typing Agent, Discovery Education, all these different services that all these kids have all these different logins to. Clever helps unify all that and sign in using your Google account. That's fantastic until you start to work with a kindergartner, all right? So when I look back at this, look at this recommended student username configuration that I have on this slide. There is no way that I could legitimately walk into a first grade or a kindergarten room, talk to that teacher and say, yeah, here are all of your student logins. How about you just use it this way, right? That's crazy. That isn't going to work. So it's funny to kind of go back and look and see what we were doing here. Now the recommendation basically here is we need something that's going to be unique, right? In my district, we use first initial, last name, graduation year. So that's what we use. It's pretty typical. A lot of school districts do it that way. That helps. We still have duplicates that we have to remove, even with that convention, but not very many. Doesn't really matter what you use. Like I said, again, you gotta think like a teacher, and think that poor kindergarten teacher, that first grade teacher, or moving beyond. A lot of districts still aren't creating accounts for those younger kids, but you will. As these requirements come out that they're using these apps, these things like that they have to sign into, that stuff's being pushed down all the time, younger and younger. It's not a bad idea to start teaching them keyboard awareness at the same time they're learning letters anyways. I did work with one kindergarten teacher, and what we learned in the beginning of this year, and it was kind of a hard lesson, was she's like, Mitch, just sit down and watch this kid try to log in, right? I'm like, okay, I'm watching this classroom. I can definitely tell the kids that have devices at home. Those kids are just boom, boom, boom. They're touching the screen. I mean, you didn't even have to tell them they were touch screen. They just boom, they figured it out on their own. They're touching it. They're getting logged in. But then there's the kids, the other half of the class, that you can definitely tell didn't have access to stuff, right? And they're still trying to learn their letter. And it became even more difficult because the letter's on a Chromebook keyboard. The T has a tail, right? The A's upside down. These little things as a tech director that I would have never, ever even thought about had I not walked into her classroom and asked her about it. I'm like, wow, you're right. Yeah, these kids don't see this as an A, they don't see this as a Q, they don't see this as a T, because they're different scripted fonts than what they're teaching them. So, as I start to look back on this, I just think, holy cow, if I would have done that to that poor teacher, she would have killed me, right? She would have been like, they would have just created this big divide that we see in some schools of, yeah, this is the central office of the tech department, and these are the teachers. It's just small stuff like that cause that. What we ended up doing in this case is we went back to Clever, and Clever has an option called badges. Anybody using badges with Clever? Those of you who do? Greg's using it. So we went back and we looked, and Clever actually has this QR code option. And you print off these QR code stickers, and you can stick them to anything. And we'd already created like username and password cards for all these kids. What we did is we took the Clever badges, the QR code stickers, and stuck them to the back of that. And we did a kiosk mode on the Chromebooks. Kids open the Chromebooks, kiosk mode automatically logged in. There's no login screen in the beginning. It pops up their webcam. They click allow to turn the webcam on. They hold their QR code up. It goes ding, and those kids are logged into Clever. All they have to do is click on the icon they need, and they're logged into Google. So now those kindergarten kids are using Google Docs to learn how to type. They're learning keyboard awareness under their Google Doc account. They're able to access their Lexia. They're able to do whatever they need to do that we want to assign to them without that trouble, just because we're using clever badges. And what we learned, just a second, what we learned is we want them to learn how to do their username. We don't want to keep pushing it off. The issue that we were having was they don't know enough in the initial stages of kindergarten. They aren't aware of the skills. They don't have the skills, the keyboard, the letter awareness, the motorized skills until at least halfway through that year to get them through. So what the kindergarten teachers actually asked me to do was to go and turn that feature off halfway through the year. They said, we'll be ready for it halfway through the year. I asked the first grade teachers, I'm like, hey, are you guys okay? Just in case they don't tell me to turn it off, right? So if we push this off to the following year, are you guys then going to need the same thing? Or are you just going to keep pushing this off? They're like, no, our whole class is able to sign in. No problem already. So that immediately told me it was an issue with that initial part of kindergarten. Those kids just didn't have that skill yet. So, question?
When they do that, so would it take them out to kiosk mode and then log in as them?
Yep. Well, what happens is kiosk mode automatically logs them into Clever. The Clever portal pops up, and they log into Clever as them. So they're not logged into the Chromebook as them. But once they log into Clever, Clever thinks they're logged into Google. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a middleman, right? So Clever is like a middleman. You have your data access over here to Infinite Campus that has all your information on class enrollment, teachers, students. But the keys to the kingdom to get access to that are via a Google login. That Clever badge just does that process for them, right? It basically signs them into Google through the browser, and as soon as they close the lid on that kiosk session or they reboot that kiosk session, it starts it all over again. It's fresh for that next kid. Works really slick. Your kindergarten, your younger teacher, or your younger grade teachers will absolutely love you for it. Right now, a lot of school districts aren't seeing that yet because right now they don't have the need. They're just, all right, we can log in with this one common account, but I can tell you right now it's coming. Because these apps are pushing lower and lower and lower, and every kid needs an account to that app. You need a good way to get them in. So we found that's been working pretty good. It's also showed me that process of really being in tune with the issues they're having in their rooms. Other than just sitting in my office and saying, oh yeah, it's got to be this way because we're using Clever now, right? I'll talk more about Clever tomorrow in that Tech Director Tool session too, because it's become one of the core things that we do in our district now. I didn't ever intend it to be, so it's kind of interesting that it ended up being that way. All right. Will we combine students and staff into a single apps dashboard? How many people remember having separate Google Apps instances for students and staff? Anybody in here have that? Yeah, there was a few. I know there was because I helped some of you with it. No longer do we have to do that. That's awesome. Now in Google Apps, everything is organizational unit-based. You can go in, you can basically shut off anything you need to by OU, turn on anything you need, be as restrictive or as open as you ever want to be. This is more about like if we're going to roll out Google Apps. Anybody in here still planning on going to Google? They're not on the Google Mail yet, but looking to? Everybody's pretty much done now. How many people aren't using Google Mail at all, but using everything else? What do you guys use? The AEAs, yeah, Smart Mail or something? Yep. And you guys? You're still using in-house Exchange or is it hosted? In-house. Are you looking at moving it to hosted or anything or not?
I think we'll be moving to Google.
Moving to Google? Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to do it yourself or look for a company or?
Probably do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many tools out there now to do it that it's not that hard.
Yeah. Google Directory Sync will do it for you.
There's actually it's a migration, Google Apps migration for Exchange. Yeah, we'll do it. There's also some other tools out there too that are relatively cheap that make it pretty easy. But I'm so glad I'm beyond that. Holy cow, you'd be so happy to get that off your plate. That was the scariest thing ever. I remember back talking to Jeff, and I'm like, man, I really don't know about giving up control of this. It's going to be the scariest thing ever, and it's been the best move. And I know everybody else out here that's moved can say the same thing, right? So it's like, all right, email's down, Google's down. Oh, sorry, Google's down, so nothing I can do about it.
I I use Outlook still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you use a connector.
Yep.
Yeah. We have a few teachers that have asked about it, but not really pushed. I'm thankful that I don't have to fight that fight. Even our administrators use the web-based, and I think Jim had already fought that fight before I got there. So that's nice. But when I was a consultant, there was a lot of administrators I had to work with to say it's okay to let go of your Outlook. Just in the fact that if you're not on your machine, then it's going to be a different experience. But you're used to using both anyway, so it doesn't matter to you. You're pretty flexible in that. So anybody else really heavily still using Outlook connected to Google? No? See, things have shifted so fast and so seamless. All right. The sign-up process for Google Apps for Education, still the same. I'll skip right through that. Verifying your domain. Everybody knows how to do that stuff now. All right, creating organizations. Now this is one I did want to talk about. Back when I very first started working with this, and it really took me a long time, really until I started working for Amplified IT to really understand this. And even when I went to go work for Amplified IT, Tim Lee, who owns that company, he and I sat down and he didn't really have a good understanding of it. And we ended up kind of hashing out a really good justification for organizational structure. But in the past, we just go in and say, all right, we're in Iowa, a big school district in Iowa is, 20,000 kids, right? That's a pretty good sized district in Iowa. But when you go and work with a school district that has 650,000 kids, things get to be a little different. The requirements are a little different because they have a whole lot more schools. Like, it's a ridiculous amount. You try to scroll on the left when you're looking at your organizational structure, and Google freaks out. Like, it starts scrolling on its own and all kinds of crazy stuff. So you really have to kind of think. But what we ended up finding out and realizing was breaking down that argument of, do we use graduation year or do we use grade? That's always been the big thing that everybody argues. In Iowa, 9 times out of 10, everybody's going to do it by graduation year because we're so small and it doesn't really matter. And when I go work with you, if you say, hey Mitch, what do you think? What should I use? I'll break it down to this. If you're going to automate your process, so you're going to automate, you use something to automate your student information system, whether it be a script, a home-built script, or an app, or whatever you use to connect Infinite Campus, or your whatever student information system you use. If you use an app to connect, or a script to connect your users to, say, Active Directory, or some kind of open directory, or whatever your LDAP system is, LDAP's LDAP. If you're using something to connect that and automate that, and then you automate that connection from Google, or from that system to Google, or you automate the connection from that student information directly to Google, if that's an automated system, and that's happening without any of your intervention, do it by grade. If you're doing it manually, if you're rolling your students manually, you're creating users manually, or any part of that process at all is manual, do it by graduation year. And the reason that I say that is, if you're automating, all of your settings in Google Apps now are applied to an organizational unit. So if you go in, you shut apps off, you go in, you create like an email filter, you go in and you create a restricted email setup, anything like that. If you go into any of those settings and you override that setting and take that inheritance away, and then you start moving those organizational units around, you actually move the containers around, you're going to screw those permissions up, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to forget to go back and you're going to forget to make the changes on that container. Okay? Does that make sense? So if you're doing it by graduation year and you're moving those containers, so like we have different schools. We have a high school, we have a middle school, we have 3 elementary schools. Underneath those schools in our district, we have graduation years underneath those. So then I have to roll those graduation year OUs to that next building every year, right? So I have to roll at least one OU or one class in every OU every year. That bit me this year because I had one that was overridden to shut email delivery off to the outside for some middle school kids. I rolled them up as 9th graders into the high school and I forgot to turn that off for them when I rolled it. Okay? Had that been automated, had that process been automated and I didn't have to go and move those organization units and I had it by grade, those containers would have stayed in their place because grade 9 is always underneath the high school, right? I wouldn't have had to move that container. That container would have always retained those permissions and those students would have moved out of that container, but the container itself would have kept the permissions. So if you're automating that process, doing it by grade, you're keeping those containers in their spots with their permissions at all times. You're moving the kids. But that's not realistic if you're not automating it, because if you have to go in and move all those kids manually every year, that sucks. So that's why we do it by graduation year, so we can just move the container, right? So that's where that difference lies. People don't understand that. They're like, oh, just do it by graduation year and be done. Like, no, because if you're automating that, you're moving that whole container. That doesn't make sense. That's screwing your permissions all up in Google. Okay, so remember that. If you're automating it, do it by grade so that container stays in its spot, keeps your permissions. If you're a small school and you just have it underneath students and you have all your graduation years and you don't ever move it, it doesn't matter. But if you do have multiple buildings and you're moving those around, that's where that argument lies. It's all in that container and the permissions that are assigned to that container. Just like old school networking, old school file shares, same mentality. We're just moving it to Google now. Okay? Any questions on that? Yeah.
So in file servers, there's a difference between copying and moving.
Right.
You're saying this is a move.
This is a move. Very much a move.
Thank you.
Yep. And specifically in Google, when you override the inheritance, because it's going to take that permission with it when it's been overridden. Even though it's getting a new set of inheritance above it, if it's overridden, it's still going to take it. It bit me this year. I had a teacher email me and they're like, hey, we're working on something tonight with the freshmen, and we need to email this community member, and they're getting all these admin bounces back. And I said, send me the bounce. I don't know what's going on, you know? And I was like, oh, of course. They had a restricted delivery policy set on the night, or when they were in the middle school and bumped up. So,
like our way around it is we have basically 3 OUs, high school OU, middle school OU, elementary OU, and grade levels within that. So we only apply the policies.
right. And you do it by grade?
We do it by
You automate
we do it by
them?
graduation year.
You do.
But the graduation years are several years of high school.
You make sure you don't override at the level, yeah, and that works too. What I find though is a lot of times I end up having even a different setting for, like, say my 7th and 8th graders at that middle school level. So then I would have to have one on top of that for each grade. I mean, which works. I don't know. Maybe I'm too OCD. I don't know. But that would work. Absolutely. The fun thing is, we used to talk about like the additional Google services, like Amplified IT, like always emphasize that, maybe emphasize, oh yeah, we have all these other Google services in here that need to be shut off. I talked to many of you about that. They cleaned up a whole bunch of that. It's like half of them now. So if I actually go in the admin console, let's see if I can get it there. So if I go in the admin console now, it's half of what it used to be. Those things aren't nearly as scary as they were. There was only one that I wasn't really ever concerned about, and it's Orkut, which is a social networking service. But now we're pushed Google+. So if we're pushing Google+, then I think culture's changed, right? Cultures in schools have really changed from, all right, we're going to really worry about coddling these kids and protecting them to, all right, let's expose them to the technology and show them how to use it correctly. So that's kind of a breath of fresh air too. All right. I'm sure Chad's working hard back there trying to get the wireless going more faster. Skip that. We don't want to push it any harder than we need to. But anyways, some of those services in there, they've moved a lot of the services that used to be in additional Google services even into like underneath the Google apps themselves, the G Suite apps now, they call it in the admin console. Any of those listed underneath G Suite apps, those ones fall underneath our Google Apps terms of service, and that is important to you, just because of the fact that underneath the education terms of service, there's all kinds of verbiage in there that protect you. So that applies to like things like advertising, collecting data, things like that. All that stuff's underneath that education terms of service, so all those apps that now moved underneath that really help us because those also now fall underneath. So things like Google+, things like Google Hangouts, which is evolving now too. But all these different apps that used to be outside, we were worried about them collecting information and things like that, and they technically could have. Now fall underneath that terms of service. So other important thing about that is support. You used to not be able to do support requests for those things, and now you can. So that was a good change.
Mitch, sort of related, not related.
Yeah.
I went and turned on the profile syncing.
Yep.
And I had a big old notice that said that it's not under the terms of service, general terms of
That's
service.
interesting. But what kind?
It was big.
Now it does fall underneath additional Google services, right? So
It said that I needed explicit permission from parents
Yes.
to turn the service on with the profile syncing.
and that service is on by default, which is even more interesting.
Mine was off for some reason. I don't know if it, before I went home, if I was playing with it, and turned it off.
Right.
And it wasn't working for teachers. Oh, cool.
So the interesting thing about that is if it's off, then a lot of things in the Chromebook don't work.
Don't work. Yeah, nothing worked. Like we had kids, logging out, logging back into a different one, and obviously nothing was syncing. So
I don't know if we get that message because they grouped it underneath like YouTube.
I don't know. It was very interesting.
That would be an interesting question that we should bring up in a podcast or something to Google themselves.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see what their thinking is on that.
Right.
Why the profile syncing is more security demanding, I guess, than
Right.
doc syncing or any of the other stuff.
Right, because there's a lot less data in there.
Right, it's all there anyway, so what's more important about that I then need explicit
I think it's probably more they just need a set of eyes to change it.
I don't know.
Well, and it could be that they might sign in somewhere else, and leave a sign in, and someone could access.
Or since it's
That's still,
personal information, about a person versus, I don't know.
that's still in their basic account, I mean,
It's very strange. And so
that is
next-
very strange.
So next year, we're gonna put in some.
But I saw your post on the Mac admins, and I saw it after somebody else had answered. I had the same issue with like one organization unit. Jim was, before I got there, Jim was messing around too, and he had forgot to turn it back on for one. And they finally got old enough that they realized that, hey, our bookmarks aren't here. So I started getting these emails. I'm like, what are you talking about? Your bookmarks aren't here. It's only one class, right? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I thought, oh yeah, Google Sync.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was off.
And it
Without one
took
of
me
you.
forever to find the setting too.
Right.
They had to do it well.
Yeah, they do. They do. So what they're talking about is with Chromebooks, there's actually another, and I wish the internet worked better, I'd go in the admin console, but underneath apps, so G Suite apps and then additional apps, there is a service in there called Google Sync. And nobody really, you wouldn't know what it is, because technically it should be on.
It doesn't say anything.
It does. It says nothing about it. Like even if you go to the help article, it says nothing about it. All it does is sync profile information. So like when you're even logged into Google Chrome on your machine and you sign into Chrome on your machine, like a PC, and that information syncs across whatever devices you're on. Google Sync is the service that syncs that stuff across. So if you're having issues in your domain where teachers are signing into Chrome and you can't figure out why their bookmarks won't save and they won't go across to their device, because Sync's off.
Out of curiosity on that, I opened up a ticket with support, and the tier 1 guy didn't know anything, tier 2 guy didn't know anything about why it was
That's
different.
crazy.
And so I don't know if that was new, and I just happened to be the first person to stumble across it or what.
So the one thing that I learned about Google support, I'll get to you in just a sec. One thing I learned about Google support is always escalate it to tier 3.
Maybe I should have.
Yeah, always.
Because I only
So
know tier 1 and tier 2.
I had to deal with them all the time when I was at Amplified, and I just say, hey, give me a tier 3 engineer, call me back. That's how I'd always open the conversation. And they're like, okay,
Awesome.
what's up?
That particular issue you're talking about bookmarks on something when you're pushing through the admin console.
Mm-hmm.
If they log out, delete their accounts, close Chrome, open Chrome, sign back in, and link profile.
Yep.
On the pop-up.
Because a lot of times they don't know to click link profile.
Right.
And that screen's got terrible instructions too, right? That could be a lot more problem. We try to do it for them. Like if we re-image a machine, we hand out a new image hand out a new image or a new image machine to them. We have them sign in right there. We're like, all right, go into Chrome, log in quick. I just have my techs automatically programmed to do that. They're like, just go in and make sure you go in and help them sign in and link data. That saves us more time in the front end than the back. We automatically push Chrome out with the MSI, the business version. We're a PC district, just so you guys know. So we push it out. So it's automatically installed anyway. They just pop it open, boom, log in. So, but even after that, if that syncs off, even if you do that, it still won't work.
Right.
So Google Sync is a service that could be off in your domain, so if you've been fighting that issue and you can't figure it out, that's what's up. Then we go back into talking about multiple domains, 2 apps dashboards. We talked about that a little bit. Look at all these fancy graphics we had back then. Man. Have limitations. These limitations, this is awesome that they've actually broke through a lot of these. You look at like, you can only have one custom logo for your account and all that stuff. Technically, yeah, that's still the case, but this hasn't changed much. We talked about that already with the organizational structure. How many people are still doing your k12.i.us domains as your primaries? And you know what? The interesting thing about that is, now that Google has given us the ability to change the domain name, how many conversations are happening now around the admin table about changing that? So a few, yeah. You know, a lot of schools that I go in at help, that was the main hiccup. I go back to thinking about before we were able to auto-fill that domain, right? In a Chromebook. Now you go in with, I don't know, what was it, 51 or 50 or whatever version it was and above. Now you can go in and automatically fill that domain, so all they need is their username. But before that, those poor kindergarten teachers, now if we were going and we had them using that username convention that I showed at spencer.k12.i.us, or even if I had a hyphenated name before that, you know, trying to get them logged in, holy cow.
I have auto permanent, so all I gotta do.
Yep. Yeah,
Still.
that's helped a bunch though. Helped a bunch. If you don't have that turned on, make sure you go do that. Your teachers will love you. It's a setting in Google Chrome or Google Management, Google Chrome Management, that allows you to go in and put a pre-filled domain name in for your users. So when they open up their Chromebook, that's already there. They just put their username in. One trick that you can do is you can also, if you're allowing sign in for multiple domains yet, or if just like for you can keep typing the whole email address in that box. So like I could put my whole Gmail address, even though it's auto-filling that @ part. As soon as you put the @ symbol in it wipes that out. So you can use that and still use multiple logins if you wanted to.
Unless you have lockdown only or domain.
Right, which we do, other than our technicians, OUs, and teachers too, I guess. Provisioning users, nothing's changed here. This is still the same process. A lot more school districts are automating this now. I can honestly tell you at Spencer, I manually create accounts yet. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say that I automate it. I don't right now. We don't have a lot of turnover. I do use Google Ops Manager to script all my new kids. So like this year we started having our kindergartners in there. So I did automate that with a script in Google Ops Manager and provision those accounts. But if I have onesie twosies that don't happen very often in our district, I just manually create them or have our techs create them. I do have a way I can sync it, but right now I haven't done it. I've just been so busy. Honestly, the only reason it's not a big deal to me right now to automate it, so I just haven't done it. But I see more and more school districts automating that. How many people are like automating that in some way, that account creation? So, you know, if I would have asked that question 3 years ago, I'd have maybe one hand and one guy sit there and talk about it all day because he's so excited and pumped, right? So.
How many schools have you seen drop Active Directory and how that all together?
That's an interesting conversation. I would love to at my district. I see it a lot. Right now we still rely on it. I'm going to talk about a tool that's kind of taking us away from that a little bit tomorrow in Neverware to be able to turn our PCs into Chromebooks. But we still have, you know, our district still has a reliance on some PC software. So we still have quite a few PCs in our district. And that's still the most effective way for me to manage it. It's not a big overhead on my part to manage Active Directory, but I see more of a push that goes along those lines of completely eliminating data centers. I worked with a lot of school districts when I was at Amplified IT and partnered with Amazon Web Services to move a lot of the services to the cloud. It doesn't necessarily eliminate that, right? I mean, there's still some hook there for Active Directory. But a lot of districts are trying to offload their workload to the cloud, disaster recovery-wise. I mean, there's, you know, the list goes on and on for reasons to do that. A lot of districts, I think, are scared of the price and don't understand the pricing structure. Chad Ferricks and I actually met with Amazon multiple occasions. Chad still meets with them pretty frequently about their pricing structure, and I don't think they even really understand it. They have an education discount. They have an education discount, but they don't get it. So trying to get their heads wrapped around it, and we're telling them, hey, there's a huge market for this. There's a lot of schools that use this, and there's other services, right? I mean, Microsoft has it through Azure and all that stuff that you can do. So there's a lot of things that you can do to eliminate. I think that's kind of where it's headed, is why pay all this money in hardware when you don't need to, especially when you start looking at disaster recovery. Having that redundancy, having multiple SANs, across a path and paying for that path. Or we're a VMware shop still at Spencer. We have a 4-host VM infrastructure. If I was going to honestly look at a disaster recovery footprint, how big of a footprint should I realistically look at to say, all right, if this town gets hit by a Category 4 tornado, what is my site going to get wiped out? Do I need to partner with Scott or partner with an AEA and offload that to somewhere? Or what if I just replicate it to the cloud? What if I replicate it to Amazon? What if I replicate it right to VMware through their cloud-based service? And what if I don't have it on my site at all and they replicate it to their different sites? So it's an interesting conversation. I don't know where it'll go. I don't think any of us really do. But that's kind of the push I've seen is, not only along the lines of getting rid of Active Directory, we don't really need it anymore, we're using Chromebooks, to why do we need any of this, right? So it's an interesting movement. Chad right now, I think he has one server left in-house. He's trying to get rid of that one. Once he does, everything will be on Amazon Web Services for him. We still have a ton. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I have a ton of servers sitting in my data center right now. Some use, like if I lost one, I would cry. Some, like my VMware infrastructure, if I lost it, I would go find a different job, right? So, so there's different. It's an interesting world to live in. I think it's the coolest. We have the coolest job in the world, right? I mean, our job changes every day. There's different stuff all the time. But as far as provisioning users go, same old deal. Nobody really does CSV file uploads anymore. Directory sync, I actually have directory sync running. I have it working, I haven't actually written to. If I make the cut, it'll work. Because I've written some amazing different ways to make that work through my previous experiences. But again, I haven't felt the need or been pressured to get this turned on in my district just because we don't have turnover. If I was in a school district where kids were leaving and constantly coming back and things are changing a lot, that'd be different for me. But right now it's not a priority. I have a lot bigger problems to worry about. And directory sync, that's a great screenshot. It still kind of looks the same, but it's a lot more intelligent now. How many people are using directory sync in here? Yeah, quite a few. Some of you I've helped, I know, in the past. Powerful tool. Slowly being replaced now by other ways to automate that through SIP connectors and things like that, but still a powerful tool. You can do some really cool stuff with it. Another thing with Clever, and I'm tooting our horn a lot, but I've just been really impressed. Clever can actually provision accounts too. I don't know, Greg, have you looked at that at all?
Well, we're not using it.
I don't think so. It's not as flexible, I think, as that I would, that you really need it to be. But it can actually pull the information. It's pulling information from your student information system anyways. So they can actually provision accounts in Google Apps as well.
So they actually have right access to it.
Yes. I don't know. Komodo Cloud's one that,
They pulled a bunch of stuff that couldn't actually write back.
yeah,
But
Clever can write back. Yeah, it's really powerful. So I've only scratched, like this is completely like on accident that I found this. I mean, I have always known about Clever for different things. What time are we supposed to be done? Now? All right, so.